Thank you, Reverend Flowers. I always get chills. Our next speaker is a leading Israeli columnist and writer and the author of the New York Times best-selling book, My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel. Born in Rehovot, Israel, Ari Shavit served as a paratrooper in the IDF and studied philosophy at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In the 1990s, he chaired the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and in 1995 joined Haaretz, where he serves on the newspaper's editorial board. Shavit also is a leading commentator on Israeli television. He's not afraid to criticize Israel or the Israeli government, but when it comes to BDS, Mr. Shavit has raised penetrating questions and has expressed deep concerns about the BDS campaign and its motives. It's with great honor that I present Ari Shavit.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Reverend, for your great words. Thank you all for being here. I'm really grateful to be invited here and to stand here. I feel really humbled to stand by so many of you who gathered here. First of all, I always wanted to get to Seattle and never had the chance. And I already noticed that it is as beautiful and civilized as I imagined. I think that the fact that really so many people have gathered here from so many different organizations is such a promising sign, because as you'll see when I end my speech, I think that unity and finding a way for us to get together into a real one big tent is so essential with the problems and challenges facing us. And as BDS is the subject this evening, I would like to broaden a bit the frame and would like to put the BDS challenge, which I see as the most dramatic challenge facing us, but I would like to put it in context and see the deeper and larger problems facing us that BDS is now the greatest symptom of. So I will try to do that while exploring what I see as really both the basic justice and morality of the State of Israel, but also the problems that we have sometimes created and how we really have to face them. Because I do believe, my wish for this great gathering is that we'll go out of here not only with a strong sense of how right we are, but also of what we should do. And there is a lot we must do. I'll begin with a few words about my country and how I see it as I wrote the book and as I finished this great journey that I went through while looking at it. I wrote my book, My Promised Land, because I had a deep sense that we Israelis, and in many ways we Jews, have lost our narrative. Judaism has come to begin with from the narrative, from the text, from the book. And narrative is essential to our civilization and to our culture. Israel, Zionism, was a narrative before it was anything else. We had a narrative, a sense of meaning, a sense of who we are, a sense of how just we are, before there was anything else there. But sadly, over the years, while Israel grew stronger politically, economically, and militarily, the narrative that held us together evaporated. In my mind, this happened because of basically two things. One is the great debate that has begun on the seventh day of the Six-Day War, a debate we should be having, but a debate that has created a crack within our narrative, within our people, both here and there. The second thing that has happened is that as we grew stronger and as Israelis became more and more cynical, we've lost the ability to look at the great wonder Israel is. So in many ways, what we had in the outset of Zionism and when Israel was young, literally, was gradually lost because of these two elements. So what I did, and I will not talk much about my book, but I'll tell what is relevant to what we are discussing today. When I looked at Zionism's beginning through the story of my own family, I realized that exactly contrary to what BDS people like say, Zionism is no colonialism. It is exactly the opposite. Because the great insight the early Zionists had was that they tried to save the Jews from the wrath of Europe. We were not sent there by some empire. On the contrary, the brilliant genius idea of Zionism, the first one, was that we must use European political power and economic power and technology in order to create a European-like safe haven outside of Europe for the Jews that will save us from the wrath of Europe. So to call us colonialists or imperialists is the most outrageous statement one can make. Because Zionism's only sin was that it was too late. If we had launched this great moral project 20 years earlier, if Herzl would have started in 1877 rather 1897, if we would have had a Jewish state in the 1920s rather in the 1940s, millions and millions and millions would have been saved. So to claim that we are the creation of some conspiracy of the West to overtake the Middle East is vile, is not only totally untrue, because at the end of the day, we were, and in many ways we still are, a lonely people that has been persecuted for millennia. For over 1,000 years, we were Europe's ultimate other. We were treated like dirt. And the great thing about Zionism, that its early founders realized that we are about to become Europe's ultimate victims. And as we have such a sensitive European week this week, with the Pope's visits colliding with the European parliamentary elections and with the terror in Brussels, we have to stand up and look at the Europeans with a straight look and tell them that we are willing to get criticism, and we should get criticism. We are willing to get into a debate, but the historical context cannot be forgotten. We are not China, and we are not Russia, and we are not Germany. We are not a world power. We are a small, remarkable, but endangered species that has done the utmost to save itself in the most remarkable way. This was true 100 years ago, and in many ways, and I'll discuss it, it is true today. So let no one confuse us, or confuse our young, or confuse the rest of the world with this kind of vile, disgusting rhetorics that is so flawed, morally and intellectually. Let me talk about the overall challenges I see facing Israel. I do it at the end of the book, and I've felt even strongly about it in the 6 months that I've traveled around the Jewish world following the publication of the book. Israel is the most threatened democracy on the face of the earth. I have issue with some of Israel's policy. I always opposed occupation, and I never thought settlements were a great idea. And yet the conflict in the Middle East is not about occupations, and it's not about settlements. It's a deep existential conflict that has religious elements and social elements and goes right into the core of the identity of the people of the Middle East. That does not mean that we should not change our ways, but we must do it while realizing what the real context is. So when I look at my beloved nation, endangered nations, I think it faces 3 internal challenges and 3 external ones. The external ones, the deep tension between the Jewish state and large parts, thankfully not all, but large parts of the Islamic world surrounding us, especially because we are talking about the Holy Land and the Holy City. Right now, this is manifested with the deep tension and great threat of Iran going nuclear. The second challenge facing Israel is the tension between this Jewish democratic entity and large parts of the Arab world. Sadly, if you look at the Middle East, you see a region that is intolerant to its minorities. Syria is not just an accident. It's a human catastrophe that the world cannot do anything about because there is a fundamental flaw in the way the region handles its public affairs and its disputes. And Israel can never risk being weak in this rough neighborhood. The third tension is the one with our Palestinian brothers, and I wish we'll have peace. I myself am willing to pay almost any price that is not suicidal to have peace. But we see the conflict as an ongoing, deep conflict that is not easily solved. Ireland is solved. The Balkans are in a different place. We are still with this 100-year war. Secretaries of State come and go, and the conflict is still with us. Israel then faces 3 internal challenges: how to integrate the Arab-Israeli minority and the ultra-Orthodox minority into its great society. That's the first one. The second, how to guarantee social justice and a reasonable life to Israel's middle class. And the third one is how to change and reform our political system, which is so flawed. Israelis as individuals are so remarkable, and Israeli society is so rich and colorful. But Israeli politics, for a long time, I'm not talking about this prime minister or another, have been totally flawed. They do not represent the great spirit and the great talents of Israel. But as I look around, the 7th challenge is the greatest of them all. the greatest of them all. And the seventh challenge is the attempt to make Israel illegitimate. In my mind, it is today the greatest danger facing us. Why? Because of two reasons. One, throughout history, we made sure that we'll have great allies supporting us. We could not have survived there without first the British support, then the French support, and then this great alliance with the great United States of America. If, God forbid, this is endangered or eroded, we are in deep, deep trouble. But there is another element too. We've succeeded through 100 years of remarkable historic effort because we always made sure we'll have the moral high ground. We are Jews. We have a heritage, we have values, we have a history, we have a neshama. We are not China, we cannot do Tibet, and we are not Russia, we cannot do the Crimea. Even Russia cannot do the Crimea, apparently. So we always have to combine strength and realism with a sense of justice. A sense of justice is essential not only to our values and to our identity, but to our ability to act on the world stage. And both are now threatened. So in my mind, the greatest battle today for Israel's future and for the future of the Jewish people is actually in addressing three audiences. One, the international community, which is hypocritical for us in regarding to us, but we have to address it. We have to do some things about it. Second, the progressive forces in the United States. I urge all people on the right to understand this. Even if you have strong right-wing convictions, you have to realize that Israel does not have a problem on the right in this country and others. Israel has a deep problem with progressive forces throughout the world, and mainly here. So the battleground is winning the hearts and minds of progressive in this country and elsewhere. The third issue, which is related to this, is our own young Jews. Because I can tell you, traveling around the country, the generation gap is astonishing. Astonishing. People 70 and beyond have the Holocaust as their context and are religiously committed to Israel. People 50 and beyond have pre-67 Israel in their mind, and they are with Israel with all the criticism and problems. People under 30 are in a different world. Totally different world. And if we do not act in an active way to win their hearts, we will lose them. So, ironically, the greatest battle today for Israel is not only with the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli Special Forces and the great heroes of the IDF. The greatest battle for the future of Israel is here. American campuses are the new battleground of the Jewish people. There is no other battleground that is more important. If, God forbid, we lose this battle, with all the might of our Air Force, we will not be able to use it. If we will lose the battle for the future here, we will endanger the future there. Only approximately 60% of Israelis serve in the IDF, young Israelis. It's still a great force, structure shaping Israeli identity. But 85% of young Americans go to campuses, to universities. The Jewish future is shaped here. So how are things here? Ain't pretty. I'm so happy about the victory you had here, and I think you should be very proud of your youngsters. But I've been around. I went through many American universities in the last few months. I was just observing what's happening in UCLA just a few hours ago. We won the vote there, too, which was a great achievement. But there is a great counteroffensive, and the battle is a fierce one, without getting to the details. So let's begin to analyze it one by one. First of all, BDS. What's so ugly about BDS? What's so dangerous about it is that it really singles out Israel in the most outrageous way. It does not only tell lies, disgusting lies, but when you see that people who pretend to be human rights activists do not care about any human rights violations anywhere, but they only concentrate on hate for the one Jewish democratic state, then you realize it's not human rights activity, it's something quite else. When you see the way that people are tempted not to address any problems in China or Russia or definitely the Middle East, 130,000 people killed in Syria is nothing. But the settlement is a war crime. And again, I oppose settlements, but they are not war crimes. Millions and millions of refugees all around us. Brutality. Apartheid against women in South Africa. Gays persecuted in Gaza and Egypt and anywhere. But BDS succeeds in creating this coalition of minorities who identify with this vile campaign. It's morally outrageous, it's intellectually inconsistent, and it's very, very dangerous. But why is it so dangerous? Because so many of our youngsters are confused. Because for a long time, we've not provided our youngsters with the concepts, with the information, and with the spirit needed to deal with this great issue. And the result is that you see nearly desperate young Jews throughout North America who still love Israel. They either have been on birthright or they got it from their parents. They have warmth towards Israel. But when they are faced with this vile attack, they are nearly helpless. They don't have the ammunition. And that's not their fault. It's our fault. It's the fault of us in Israel, our government and establishment that does not talk about it, but did not really get it and internalize how serious this is. And it's the fault of us here as well, because we've not been doing the right thing. I don't want to get into the details of it, But I can tell you that I talked to thousands of students. I've listened to hundreds of students in the last months. Many of the conversations were heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. Because in many universities, you have the active group, the 10, 20% that totally have it and are fighting for Israel and are fighting for the Jewish cause. But then you have the frightening elements of people who are joining our enemies. There are another small minority on the other hand. And what's worse, you have a majority of people who are drawn to some sort of apathy, unfriendly apathy, because Israel has become radioactive and they do not know what to do with it. So they stay away because it's trouble. For so many of them, Israel has become some sort of embarrassing relative. They know they're related to it, but they don't quite understand what the relationship is, and they don't have the knowledge and concepts to fight BDS. So God forbid they will not join it, this majority. But they're so lost in many ways, and I've had people actually saying it to me. They feel abandoned. Abandoned by Israel and abandoned by large parts of the Jewish establishment. And you think this is a problem, let me make you a bit more concerned. We've had 5 quiet years in Israel. Imagine what would happen if, God forbid, Israel would need to use force again in the coming years. Whether in Lebanon or Gaza or Iran or somewhere. The campuses will be ablaze. And our youngsters will not have the ability to fight what would come. So I think it is essential not only to speak the right things that we must speak about how damned and dangerous this movement is, but we really have to look at it, analyze it, have a strategy, and have a vision. So first of all, we must understand, why is this happening? It's true they are funded by some forces. You see sophistication there that you see it's not some spontaneous forces. There are dark forces there. You see frightening coalitions. When you see people who are so different from one another and have little in common, the one thing in common they have is hate for Israel, you smell the problem. But let's look at the core issues. I think there are 5. The first problem we have is that the younger generation is totally into universal values, and Israel is perceived as a tribal entity. And to a large extent, this great Jewish community is perceived as tribal. We have to deal with that. The second problem we have is that after Iraq, America and large parts of the West are into appeasement. There is such deep fatigue of any conflict. And Israel is perceived as part of a conflict, which it is. So there is any use of force is perceived now as problematic. And Israel is about use of force. The third problem is that political correctness in academic institutions and intelligentsia circles does not let people talk about non-Western evil. You cannot really address the evil in Syria, the evil of Hamas. You don't have the language to talk about it. So you only concentrate on the pro-Western forces. The fourth problem is our problem. Because occupation and settlement are perceived as totally unacceptable. I happen to think they are wrong too. But even those who support them should realize that while the settlers won the battle for the hills, they totally lost the battle for the world's legitimacy. Every new settlement is another problem for any student in any campus. And the fifth issue, which is not as dramatic, but it is important, is the problem of Israel's religious politics, which is especially relevant when we stand in this great temple. The fact that Israel is perceived as associated with kind of theocratic forces that are totally unacceptable does not help. So what were our mistakes regarding these 5 challenges? And as there are people of all colors here, I'll bring my criticism of all sides. What were the mistakes of the left? People in the left ignored the fact that there are dark forces fighting against us. I had my experience of that years ago when I published a harsh, critical article of Israel, and I saw what kind of support I get. And that taught me a lesson. We must remember that although Israel is strong now and the Jewish community is strong, there are still people out there who treat us differently than they treat other people. And we always have to be aware of it, and I think that many people on the left were not cautious enough on this matter. The other mistake on the left was that it lost this ability to talk about the wonder of Israel, the greatness of Israel. Because of the great debate over occupation, we became too bitter and critical, and the side of Israel's wonder was not emphasized. I think the same applies to the relationship to this great community. Because in my mind, this great American Jewish community is wondrous itself. We created the miracle of Israel there, but you created the miracle of a perfect diaspora here. And I urge many people on the left to respect that and to remember that. To remember that at the end of the day, the Jews in this country are a minority that have established a great, great community, and not only be critical. And there's a lot to criticize. The mistake done on the right were, one, being seduced into this alliance with Tea Party America. The only way to Israel to succeed is to have a strong alliance between non-Tea Party Israel and non-Tea Party America. And the fact that so many people bought into this comfort zone of people who love us whatever we do, that was one of the greatest mistakes of the last 20 years. The other mistake was being overprotective of Israel. I love my country. I think it's wondrous. But I think no young person can love a marble statue. Real love is when you love someone who has wrinkles too. Israel is not a top model. And when you love, you don't need a top model. So this attempt to censor any criticism and to say always that Israel is just perfect and that anyone having any criticism of Israel is totally against us, that was wrong. That was wrong. because it does not enable young people to really relate with the real Israel. And I think real Israel is so amazing, there's no need for that. You can love it while being aware of its flaws and problems. And the third mistake of people on the right was not listening to the youngsters. We can stand here all night long and shout how right we are. If we do not listen to the young people's concerns, we will not have them. We have to listen to them. We have to understand where they are. And we have to adjust our policy and strategy and vision to where they are. I think that what I saw in many universities is that people who've been to Israel and had a great experience in Israel were given the message of the last 15 years, which was, let's ignore the trouble. Let's look at the great high-tech nation and the Tel Aviv night scene. Israel is some sort of high-tech party. Now, Israel is indeed a high-tech party, and it's great. But it has to be put in context. Because at the end, when we just talk about our NASDAQ performance, we play into the hands of our enemies. Because what they say then, you have a high-tech apartheid state. So it's not enough just to talk about all the great things Israel is doing, which we must. We have to go back to a discourse that addresses politics, addresses the problems, and talks about our justice, not only about our technology and our great way of life. So, my friends and fellow Jews and people who love and care about Israel, I think that we have to start afresh. First of all, we need unity, which is what we have here tonight. We have to begin to overcome and let each one have his own stand. I'm not into censorship. But let's try to change this bitter dynamics of internal rivalry which have paralyzed our ability to act. Then let's have openness and acceptance. Let's not be so rigid. Let's listen to one another, and let's find a way to listen to criticism. But then we must do what I said in the beginning that we've lost. We must rewrite our narrative. We must find a new way of telling our story that will be relevant to us and will be relevant to young people, and that will be the ultimate answer to BDS and such vile forces. In my mind, there are 2 or 3 goals here. We must switch. We must change people's minds and make it clear to them that we are not a Goliath, but a David. We are indeed a David, even in the 21st century. But we must make it clear both in our policies and both in the way we talk about ourselves. Then the other element, we must convince people. We must find a way to express the fact that we are a universal tribe. Yes, we are proud of being us, and we want to maintain ourselves as a great Jewish people. But we have a moral mission in the world. We must find a way to make Tikkun Olam part of our national mission. And then we must find a way again to love Israel in a new way, while being critical when it calls for it, while being realistic, but to love it with a great, great, great passion. For years, we did not have enough of this combination. It was either Israel can do no wrong or Israel can do no right. Only if we look at our great story, of the great story of Israel there and your great story here, only if we respect what we've done in the past and see how challenged we are in the future, we'll be able to fight BDS and such forces. The 20th century was the most dramatic in our history. Its first part was our worst ever. We lost every third Jew. Think of us sitting here. Every third Jew. But its second half was by far our best ever. The man-made miracle of Israel, of Jewish sovereignty there, and the man-made miracle of the perfect diaspora here are not only a Jewish achievement, they're true triumphs of the human spirit. They are remarkable in universal terms. We have built here, there what must be the home for the homeless people. And you here created the most vibrant, free, successful community a minority probably has ever created. But we must realize that both are challenged today. And the challenge is the challenge represented by BDS and such forces. They are as dangerous in Iran and perhaps even more. So we must look at the challenge. We must find a new way to love ourselves, to respect ourselves. And why we must act. Because this is the great thing that the early Zionists did. They saw the challenges of the 20th century and they tried to preempt it. It is up to us to deal with these greatest challenges of the 21st century, to guarantee the Jewish future into the 22nd century and beyond. So let us rise to the challenge. It depends on us. We there, you here, us. Thank you very much.